So the Transfiguration takes place about 1 week before Holy Week in real time. And so the mountain that Jesus has climbed up this week is in northern Galilee. And from that location, it would take about 5 days of walking to get to Jerusalem or Bethany, the site of Holy Week. So we've got that going, and it's coming up really, really soon. And what I'd like you all to do today is kind of sit back and relax and imagine that you are one of the disciples that morning and that whole week that we're going to talk about. And put yourself in the position of a disciple. While at the same time, I want you to consider yourself as a disciple in the present moment. So the idea is your faith is timeless, God's love is timeless, you're a disciple from the beginning all the way to this point in time, and you can say to yourself, I was a disciple then, and I'm a disciple now. And so I'm going to invite you to kind of get into that space. Let's start. Just a few days before the climb up that mountain, you experienced Jesus feeding 4,000 people with just a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish, and it was an extraordinary experience. You could feel, you could sense the energy of hope that was flowing between and within the crowd of people that gathered there. The Spirit was moving almost like a cool breeze on a warm, sunny day. It was powerful. That was then. And this is now. In 2026, nearly 500 million people will take communion this Sunday around the world. And when you take the sacrament today, I'm going to invite you to reflect on the power of that fact. Over 500 million people across the world are taking communion and are empowered to be the hands and feet of God. That's a powerful, powerful thing. Now, turning back in time, the next day after the feeding of the 4,000, you were sitting with Jesus and the rest of his team when Jesus asked the question, "Who do people say I am?" And there were different responses and so on and so forth. And after that, Jesus asked the question, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter gets up and he says, "Well, you're the Messiah." And Jesus said to Peter, "You didn't get that from the world. You got that from somewhere else. You got that from the Spirit." And after this quick exchange, Jesus says to Peter, "On this rock I will build my church." Now, moving into the present moment, 2026, what we understand about the statement, there's a variety of different perspectives, but the rock for the Protestant church means basically the confession of Peter that Jesus is the Mashiach. That's the rock. For the Catholic Church, the understanding is that Peter is the first pope. Now, regardless of where people stand in this type of interpretation, what is essential is when the church is operating the shalom, when we see the church working on behalf of the poor and the oppressed and providing hope. That's really, in the end, what matters most. And certainly In the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, there's a lot of evidence of that going down. Back to a couple thousand years ago. Now, Jesus continues this discussion, and he explains his death. That when they get to Jerusalem, shortly after that, he's going to die for the sake of the gospel. But he would be raised again as well. And thinking back to that whole exchange, you remember how upset Peter was. That can't happen. It's not acceptable. And you were really taken back by Jesus' response. It's about as intense as you've ever seen him. And he said, "Get behind me, Satan." You just don't fully understand. You have your mind on the things of this world. This is not where we're going. We are pushing the peace. And it was something that he made clear to all of the disciples that day. And after that, he made it clear to you that you too must pick up your cross. If you're going to follow me, you've got to pick up your cross. And that's just something we do. The peace is not easy to operate in. It never was. It never is. And so we turn our attention back to 2026, looking at the world today. And if we take a step back and look at kind of just all of society and the world and so on, we see that there remains a profound focus on power and wealth, with the desire to achieve as much power as possible to leverage as much wealth as possible. And in this power grab experience between those that do this sort of thing, the poor, the oppressed, are left a little bit behind. And more of the middle classes as well. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Now, today, as a disciple of God, of Jesus, we're all trying to find our place in this. To possibly live more simply, to share as much as we can, to continue to find ways to encourage the world to think of all people. Now, this Sunday, 2,000 years ago, you get up early in the morning and you see Jesus has gotten up early in the morning and he wakes up Peter and James and John, and you see them leaving the camp and you decide to follow them. Where are they going? And they start to hike up this mountain. And you hike up the mountain too, up to a point. You're just curious as to what in the world is going on. And then you see something. It's extraordinary. Jesus is now bright and shining and lit up, and all of a sudden Moses and Elijah appear, and the three of these guys are up there. And then this cloud comes down, and this powerful cloud, and a voice that makes it very clear that Jesus is the one, my Son in which I am well pleased. And suddenly, you see that Moses and Elijah disappear. You're at a distance, and you see the three talking to Jesus, but you're too far away to really understand what they're saying. As a matter of fact, after this cloud, there's a wind that's blowing, and it's strong. And it's strong enough that you really can't hear at a distance. It's just the way it was. But then they started to come down off the mountain, and you quickly repositioned yourself behind a large boulder to not be seen. As Jesus walked down with the others, you now could hear him more clearly, and he said that they should not tell anyone about what happened until much later. And when he said that, you noticed that Jesus did catch a glimpse of you. He didn't say anything, but he knew you were watching. And his eyes looked at you, and you looked at Jesus, and you understood that you got to be quiet too. And you did. And so for the next 4 or 5 days after this event, you walk with Jesus on the way to Jerusalem. He makes it clear again, over and over, he makes it clear that he's going to die, and you understand that he has disturbed the peace and how the law of the day works. But he made it clear that he would never, ever compromise the peace. Ever, under any circumstance, he would not compromise. And this is, of course, what gets him killed. But as you're thinking about this whole thing, you wonder, I mean, his ministry's gaining some traction, but the movement is still pretty small. And you wonder just how much risk he really represents to the powerful, but apparently he does. So you take this to your heart today and realize that today in 2026, the economics of the past that we understood through biblical study is almost the same as the economics today. The poor work very hard for very little. The wealthy, while they may work hard at times, and they do, the wealthy are rewarded hundreds of times often more than the people who are laboring in the field. And you look at that and you think, is this really what God would want? And you think back to all the prophets, and there's no evidence that he would want it. But anyway, we go on. And so another day later, Peter is talking to Jesus, and there's this exchange that takes place, and Peter says to Jesus, he's upset with one of the disciples, and he says, do I have to forgive this guy 7 times? And Jesus, no, 77 times. You keep forgiving. You keep forgiving. Because Jesus understands, as he continued to teach you, that the disciples have got to learn how to stand up for each other, to love one another, to forgive one another, to model true Christian thought in every single thing they do. And sometimes that is absolutely not popular with the world, but it is what we need to do. Looking at today, this message of forgiveness, it's a struggle. Our politics is one of revenge and the inability to be even challenged. Can't even have a debate. It feels very odd. And we can sense the cruelty in that, the inability to affirm the other, that there could be different ways of seeing things. It's the cruelty of Rome, born again. Anyway, you remember one day that Jesus was talking about the value of all people including children, and you see how important it is to welcome children into the love of God with the playfulness that Jesus displayed. Your final recollection comes just a day before entering Bethany. That's where you'd camp out in that last week of Jesus' life. And now, the mother of James and John is asking for special consideration for her sons, that they would have some special seat of honor in the kingdom. And you look and you remember Jesus' expression. He's trying to keep it cool. But he's frustrated. He really is. And it's something he's been fighting the whole time, and he knows everybody's going to have to fight, but this desire for power and recognition that the human being has is such a strong desire, it can easily displace the mission, and it does. And Jesus knows, boy, oh boy, it's a battle. Now, the other disciples, of course, they're angry about it. Jesus makes it clear to them, this is all about servant leadership. A true leader is an absolute servant of all. A true leader lifts up the poorest of the poor and is with them. That's real leadership as far as Jesus is concerned. It was hard to realize then, and it's hard to realize now. Oh boy, it is. But you know that this is what God would want if we follow the teachings of Jesus. There's so much more to the story, of course, but we can take some measure of comfort that the Spirit that worked through the disciples of old is that same Spirit we have access to this very day. And we realize that the torch of shalom has been passed to us. And we have an opportunity to share that light with others for the rest of our lives. Let us pray. Gracious God, thank you for the gift of faith and for the challenge that we face. Thank you for our community here at St. John. And may your Spirit touch us, enlighten us, and transform us each day. Amen.